Okay. Okay. So welcome everyone. We're thrilled that you are here today and you are in for a special treat. I am Amanda Prochaska. I'm the Chief Wonder Officer of Wonder Services, and I will be your host today. Thank you, Conrad and Chris, for allowing me to host this wonderful conversation. And joining me are what I consider two procurement legends. We have Conrad Smith here. He's a procurement leader turned tech founder of Graphite. And Graphite is a network-based solution for onboarding and supplier management. And before Graphite, Conrad was leading the team at Adobe through their transformation. And I will tell you, if you ever want to talk adventure with anyone, talk to Conrad. He just had a recent adventure with him and several of his family members to Mount Everest, and I'm sure he has other adventures he could share with you too. So he's a great guy. And then also joining us here, hopefully, hey, Chris, hey, Chris was able to join. So Chris is here. He's a longtime friend of mine, Chris Sawchuk. He is the principal and global advisory practice leader at Hackett. And I will tell you, Chris is my go-to person when I want amazing insights and research on procurement. He, I think, has the coolest job ever, studying procurement and sharing insights with us. So
I actually think Conrad climbing Mount Everest is a little bit more exciting.
Yes. Well, I'm sure maybe you have some adventures too, Chris, that you could share with us. But today we are here to talk about the need for speed and agility within procurement, while also balancing the ever-growing need for risk mitigation and control. So it's going to be a super interesting conversation. We're going to start with Chris today. He's going to share a couple of slides with us around some interesting research on the topic. And then we're going to go into more of a conversation around the topic that I already shared. But here's what I need from you. We want this to be more of a conversation, and we would like you to ask your questions along the way. As your host for today, I will be monitoring the questions and embedding them into the conversation, so it really can be highly interactive with all of us here today. So Conrad and Chris, are you ready to get started?
Ready to go.
All right,
Absolutely.
Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you, Chris, to take us through your couple of slides here.
Yeah, well, thank you. And when we get to the first one, what we're going to be looking at here from an overall is, what are some of the driving forces that are, really focusing us all on this area of AI? It's a very interesting environment that we're all living in right now. And, and some people use the term hype. It's all of the attention. And a lot of this attention started in 2023, even though, the focus on LLMs and, generative AI was even before that. But it really became more of a topic and something more visible for all of us, in 2023. And that has just accelerated as we go into this year. But what that has caused is a level of expectation in the marketplaces. And one of the things I'm trying to highlight with this particular slide here is that the expectations have driven higher significantly over the last 6 months or so. And part of it is because we're all aware of what AI and the potential impact is going to have on our organizations, on us personally, our societies, et cetera, as we look forward. As you look at this, there is I'll say a forcing event that is occurring here. Because of all of this, the executives, the leaders of our companies are being asked by their stakeholders, the boards of the companies, our customers, the investors in those organizations, what is your plan? What are you doing around generative AI within your environment? And the question is that there's also a level of curiosity that is occurring as well. I had a client come to me, I think it was last week or the week before, and one of the things they came to us and said, listen, Chris, and this is not only one client, but the comment is that I have to do something in supply management, in procurement, and show that we're making some progress in generative AI before the end of 2024. What can I do? What can I do to move forward quickly to do something, to be able to check the box that we are actually moving forward in this space. You know, one of the things that we find is that organizations are really bifurcated in terms of where they are today. And if we go to the next slide, one of the things that we see is that there's a bifurcation between those organizations that are exploring, generative AI, and, those organizations that are, just really just, trying to look at use cases in terms of how they can be utilized within their overall environment. When you look at this, there's this bifurcation that has occurred. And when you look at our study from earlier this year, and it's our key issue study, one of the things that you find is that about 50% of the organizations, and this is a question that we asked at the beginning of the year, are focusing on, doing something in generative AI, and 50%, are not necessarily doing anything as of yet. Now, this is a 50-50%, kind of bifurcation, within organizations, within, procurement, individuals within these organizations. And we went out to about a couple hundred different organizations. Now, this was 6 months ago. And when you look at 6 months ago, there was this environment that, we were still emerging. Now we're 6 months later, we're in June of 2024. And, one of the things that, you would highlight is that you would expect us to be further along. And I would say that we are probably further along in terms of where organizations are exploring generative AI. The challenge is when I go out, and I've had the opportunity to speak at several different, conferences over the last, couple of months, one of the things I find, and one of the things I like to do, is just ask organizations, how many of you are exploring generative AI in the current environment? And what you find is that it's a small percentage of organizations. I've even found organizations that have moved more forward, and I say progressively in this space, even a year ago. And where they are today, some of them had to take a trace back, go back a little bit, and not necessarily focus on it because of some of the privacy concerns with the information, within generative AI. Now, one of the things that I think is important, and Amanda, I don't know if you can move to the next slide.
Conrad, thank you.
There we go. One of the things that you see on the right of this slide are all of the areas that are, what we went out in this particular study to ask organizations, do you see these as opportune areas for your organization when it comes to deploying and embedding generative AI? Now, what's really interesting here is we asked organizations, all of the various, areas, when you think about supply management, what are a lot of the different activities? And most of them are listed here in this list. And what you see is that none of these are at 100%. The specific question that we asked is, do you see this as an opportunity to apply generative AI? The highest area is spend analytics, and right followed by that is contract lifecycle management, 62 and 67%. Now, today, when you look at contract lifecycle management, there are, documented evidence of use cases by companies using it in contract lifecycle management. Simply, and one very simple example is just summarizing contracts and what are the key attributes of those contracts, the key terms and conditions of those contracts in the environment. So the question really becomes is, why aren't any of these at 100%? Because the opportunity to apply generative AI is absolutely an opportunity in all of these different areas.
Hey, Chris.
I would argue that where we are is we're a bit not as aware of some of those opportunities.
Hey, Chris, sorry to interrupt you there. The CLM piece makes total sense to me, by the way. Like, this seems like a really obvious first entry. I'm a little bit surprised by spend analytics being a little above there. What's your observation in how people are using generative AI in spend analytics?
It's interesting, and where we find more of of AI and spend analytics is really AI, not necessarily generative AI. You know, what you find is the generative portion of that is that they'll use some of the, I'll call it some of the analysis capabilities of machine learning, et cetera. And that's been going on for quite some time in spend analytics. But what they'll do is they'll take those outputs and they'll, you know, they can couple that with a generative capability that allows us to, you know, develop recommendations, et cetera. So there's where I'm starting to find sort of the emergence of generative AI is really around the recommendations. What should I go do? What are some of the actions I can take as I look at analyzing all of this information?
Thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah. So Amanda, if we can go to the next slide. And, you know, this is a slide from that same study that I just showed, you know, where we asked about, you know, the focus of organizations when it comes to generative AI. Where are we today when you look at supply management? But one of the questions that we asked in the study I thought was very interesting. And it's a question that we've asked for several years, and it's not specific to procurement, but we're asking about the enterprise. What are the threats that you see to your business as you look forward? You know, maybe not surprising as we came into 2024, you know, some of the things that were elevated as concerns for 2024 were some of the things that we've been dealing with all the way through 2023 and, you know, some of 2022 as well. And that's inflation, you know, the rising costs, the recession that is, you know, has always been out there, but, you know, it looks like we're going to, you know, be able to elongate the period of time where we don't have to look at a, you know, sort of a drawback, you know, from an economic standpoint. And also the interest rates that we've been utilizing to help to draw down the level of inflation with, you know, various economies around the world. And these are the things. Now, we've been seeing as we, you know, sitting here in June of 2024 that, you know, these things have started to mitigate, you know, across. I think I saw on the news this morning that, the UK, their inflation rate came in at 2%, exactly the target that the central banks had, you know, for the economy. So some of the things that we've been doing certainly are working. But what's more interesting here is the stuff that's still colorized all the way to the right. You know, we ask about threats. And, you know, one of the things when you look at the impact of generative AI in your business and the impact of AI in the privacy of our organizations, you know, when we look at 2024, you don't see a significant number of organizations highlighting it as a threat in 2024. But what you do see as we go further out, we look into 2025, what you see is a significant increase in the number of organizations that see it as a threat on a go-forward basis. You know, last month I had the opportunity to speak at the USMA, the Utility Supply Management Association event that occurred, you know, in Phoenix. It was a large event, probably about 1,000 people there. And one of the speakers there, I believe he was from Disney. You know, not somebody in procurement, just, you know, one of the animators at Disney and, you know, involved with Pixar and all those types of things, you know, was talking about, you know, generative AI. And one of the things I thought was very interesting is he asked everyone, he said, how many of you see generative AI as an opportunity? And a bunch of folks raised their hands. And he also asked the second question is, how many do you see it as a threat? And what you saw was most people had both hands up. We see it very bifurcated. We see it as an opportunity. We also are concerned and we see it as a threat. Now, the question is, well, why do we see it as a threat? One of the reasons is if you go further back into the middle of this chart, you see an area highlighted as competitive threats. It's about the fact that things are moving very, very quickly. What are we going to do as an organization? That first slide I talked about, you know, the pressure that we're getting in the organizations to do something in this area. And if we don't do it, because it certainly is an opportunity for us to create, to leapfrog where other organizations are when it comes to generative AI. It provides us that opportunity. But there's also the concern that others can get there faster than we. And that provides the competitive threat. And I believe this is why we're very bifurcated in terms of how we see generative AI in many, many organizations. So Amanda, those are some of my initial perspectives and just some, perspectives from our key issue study, and certainly, something around this whole area that we're talking about and had been talking about when it comes to AI and
Yeah.
generative AI.
Yeah, it's super. Go ahead, Conrad. You have a question already.
No, I was just thinking about the different hype cycle kind of things. Chris, you started talking about this as a little bit of a hype cycle.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hype here. And I think back to blockchain, and I think back to like RPA automation of like 15, 20 years ago, and all the conversations that were going on in conferences and, in our teams. And this one does seem a little bit different. And it feels like it's probably because I can log into, Chat GPT or any of the other tools and use it. Like I don't have to pay for anything. I don't have to get something implemented. I can take something I'm trying to write or something I'm trying to do and just put it into this solution and have it, like I'm working with it in a very quick and easy way, and learning a little bit more about what it is and how it could help me in my business, different than I could when I had to go buy some RPA tool and program a bot, or scratch my head and understand what is really blockchain and how could it help me. This one feels very tangible, I think, to so many people.
It is. And it's much more broad. You use the example of RPA and you use the example of blockchain. These are, I would say the use cases for both of those are more narrow, or much more narrow than what generative AI's use cases are. And so because of the breadth, because of the fact that it has an impact in our B2C world, our B2B world, it's not just a business tool, it's something that we're all interacting with, in our personal lives. My family was my kids coming out of college and say, Dad, look at this. We got these tools that allow us to write research papers. I said, listen, I don't think that's what they want. But, that's when I got first exposed to it, was through my children who are in college.
Yeah. So it's also kind of a double-edged sword, if I can call it that. What I'm seeing in organizations, and I don't know if you guys are seeing the same thing, but it's like the use cases are so vast right now that people are trying to figure out, A, how do I figure out where to start? And B, I'm seeing a lot of companies do like heavy governance around generative AI and AI applications, that it worries me, because I feel like we could swing way one way, controlling risk, et cetera, versus allowing for generative AI to really be adopted. So do you guys have it? I know that was more of a statement than a question, but are you guys seeing some of that within your customers and the research?
Well, if you want me to go first, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's really, if you think about the title of this whole session, speed and risk, we have to balance within our organizations. And as you look at, generative AI and, some of the concerns on privacy, have we seen organizations sort of, take a step back? I had one particular organization, a large pharma company, that I was talking to, and they even shared some of what they're doing from a generative AI standpoint within the organization, within supply management. We were highlighting it. If you go to them today, what you find is that they've sort of stepped back. And now what they've done is I don't want to say relegated themselves, but what they've moved to is not domain specific, things that are specific to procurement, but just really leveraging Microsoft Copilot, more as a productivity tool within an environment. And why? Because the organization wants to better understand, how do we control the data, the information, the privacy, et cetera. And until they get that figured out, they're a little, apprehensive about sort of unleashing this, and letting everybody go do things until they really figure that out. So, there was a speaker that I listened to, and there's all kinds of sites of information on generative AI. And I think one of the bigger threats to generative AI and sort of its rollout is trust. It requires us to use it. And if the information coming out of there is not the information that we're expecting, or it's inaccurate, the trust factor between us and those tools is going to diminish. And that can slow down the progress. I mean, right now we see an acceleration. I mean, in so many different ways happening here. But that trust factor is a critical area. I think the privacy, et cetera, in getting a hold of that to be able to continue this momentum that we have today, because it can turn the other way and slow down. It won't stop, but it could slow it down significantly.
Mhm.
I think we see the same thing from a government perspective, right? It's like, oh my gosh, AI could be the apocalypse of everything. I would hate to see us in our organizations have so much anxiety about these things, so that that slows down the learning that we have. And this kind of gets to security and risk and some of these other things. There are things in our business in each of what we do every day that we shouldn't load up into ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
You just shouldn't go. You don't know where it's going to end up. You just shouldn't put it there. And there's other things which are probably the 80 to 90% range. That's totally fine to put it into ChatGPT. So, I think figuring out how to help people understand the implications and the application in a way that can allow that personal learning to continue to grow and accelerate, and the comfort, right? To get really comfortable with an assistant, whether, it's on the code development side or the writing side. I use Claude and ChatGPT all the time because I'm a mediocre writer. And I always feel bad going to one of my peers and say, hey, take a look at this and tell me what you think. But I can just drop it into one of these tools, and within seconds, I get, opinions back with ideas of how to restructure things. I'm not a fan of publishing, AI generated content.
Yeah.
I love having a second or third opinion of how did I structure this, and what did I do that was, it's just really nice. That way I don't have to interrupt people to get that kind of feedback. And that's one application, but I found some really cool ways that I hadn't even thought of before. We did an HR survey with the team, and I just grabbed all of these random comments, which would have taken me, I've done this before in my past jobs. It would have taken me hours to go through, read every comment, categorize the comments, draw some conclusions. And like in, less than a minute, I just dump the whole thing in there and say, what do you think about this? What are the top 5 areas of improvement, and what top 5 strengths? And boom, it's just like, it's done. And so there's some really cool things that I use that as a trivial example, but it's just like as we get more familiar and comfortable with the tool, I think we're going to find more areas where we can apply the technology in new and interesting ways, kind of like you're talking about with spend analytics, right?
Yeah.
I wonder but then it comes back to that question is if the organization puts these boundaries around everything that you can do and kind of blocks the technology, then I think it really slows down that learning. So I'm hoping that we can instead educate our people and ourselves about where what the real risks of this are, to use the technology, and kind of hold ourselves back from there while still allowing ourselves that 80 to 90%.
Yeah. And I think there's value in not only the education of our people around where those use cases can be, and kind of the trying and learning cycle of Gen AI, but there's also this capability of understanding what's a false result, right? When there's hallucinations and all of that. And I think that is a big opportunity when, as leaders here on the call, as we're thinking about our teams and equipping our team, it's not governance necessarily that we need to be a heavy hand on, right? I think that's going to slow a lot of the success in this area. It's more around how do we educate our people to understand the results that are being provided, right? I'll give you guys an example. So we're working on a white paper. When I was reading the white paper, and I think actually Madison's on the webinar right now, but we're working on this white paper, and I was like, hey, I feel like it's super corporate-y, like it feels really corporate speak. And so I threw it in, and I just said, remove all of the jargon, and simplify the language. And it was like that, right? But I would have not had that tool before, and I would have had to sit there for, 45 minutes and rewrite it. There's a huge speed there, but I also recognize the results that I got still weren't great, right? Like there was still work that I needed to do to refine it before we would actually publish it. But so I think there's a need, and I don't know if you guys are thinking about, like, if you're hearing from procurement organizations, Chris, if they're going in and helping their people understand how to use the results of Gen AI more effectively? And Conrad, if you're seeing that from your client base.
Right now, I believe that it's an interesting dynamic. I showed that one slide where on the left-hand side, and again, that was 6 months ago, where we just asked organizations, are you exploring it or are you not? Right? That's all we wanted to do. Just get a data point to say, how pervasive is this? And it was 50-50, but I would say that, my experience in a lot of these events that I've been at, it's much less than that, the percentage. And so what I find is that there's a significant desire to learn, to explore, to absorb, but not as pervasive in terms of the activity. And not that everybody is not using Chat GPT. I mean, most of us are exploring, we're doing that. We're doing things, with Microsoft Copilot, if you can afford it within your environment, et cetera. But what we're not seeing is sort of the pervasiveness in terms of specific use cases in supply management. And, I think a lot of organizations are just sitting there saying, well, what are some of the easy ways to get started? The comment that I made is, contract lifecycle management is a very obvious one. We see that out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, more, innovative types of things. And so as you look at this, I think you're going to look at use cases that are more, I'll say, productivity boosters, just freeing up time that we can do more, sort of, what Conrad was saying in terms of summarizing or helping him write something. I mean, we do it in meetings where you have a meeting, it summarizes it. I mean, that saves a lot of time. Or summarizing a contract from a supplier to understand what are the specific, terms and conditions, what are the risks within that, et cetera. It can do that. That saves time. It's a productivity boost. But then, I think we're going to be moving into what I call more transformative ways of using, generative AI. What are some of the things that we're not able to do today that this may give us the capabilities of? And I think that's where we're going to see much more excitement in this space.
Yeah. I actually was talking to a Procurement provider yesterday, and they were imagining what they could do to move away from RFPs moving forward and kind of reimagine that entire process because of generative Gen AI. So super cool. Conrad, I have a question. We're talking about use cases, and given what Graphite does and the space that you're working in, I'm wondering if you have some really interesting use cases around increasing speed of supplier onboarding while leveraging some of these technologies like generative AI.
Well, there's a number of things that come to mind, and just kind of wrapping up on that last chat. I think one of the challenges is people want automation. And today, I think Chat GPT is sort of like a friend beside you. And yeah. I think I was listening to some folks talk about this over the weekend, and I hadn't really thought about this before. I mean, I find myself doing it like, oh, I don't really like the Chat GPT response. Let me see what Claude says, and I'm kind of putting them side by side. That's not too much unlike, me saying, hey, Chris, what do you think? And I'm like, I don't know. Chris doesn't seem to know what he's talking about. Like, hey, Amanda, what do you think? And then like bringing those opinions together. I think it's really interesting. But there's that kind of creates this level of dialogue-based intelligence and support and, I don't know, wisdom versus the automation that you're looking for. One thing that we've done over the last few months is implement some technology that's AI driven that radically increases the trust that the person on the other side of the screen is who they say they are. And that, the biggest fraud that I see going on in procurement these days is bad actors hijacking supplier bank payments. I think that's a really big deal. And ultimately what that's turned into in all of our procurement teams is, hey, let's call, pick up the phone and call and see if the data is true or not, right? And so that kind of gives this super manual time delay in the process that I've got to actually now pick up the phone and do something very analog in the middle of this digital process to make sure that I can trust things. Yet, we were finding that we were looking in a video call not too much like this. Like if I pulled out my driver's license and showed it to you, it'd be very easy for me to fake that to you. like that this is like I could have Acrobat PDF that thing pretty easily. But when you apply AI and you apply deeper insights to some of these things, you can actually radically increase the confidence in what you're doing. So I think using technology in a more intelligent way for identity is a real breakthrough. Like we can get away from these phone calls altogether or almost altogether. That applies to, a whole bunch of aspects of identity and security. Chris mentioned document summarizations. There's a lot that I see people doing in terms of extracting metadata from contracts to put it in databases in a separate way so that it can be, notifications and reminders and reporting. We just signed a partnership with Google that, Google is partnering with us on their, they're actually developing the AI for us in order to do these things. And I'm super excited about that because the amount of time that's consumed in the onboarding process and the supplier management process, reviewing documents, particularly the documents of suppliers and situations where the risk is really, really low. I mean, it kind of comes back to this 80-20 thing. Let's figure out how to move really quickly past the stuff that's trivial, and let's focus our real smart people on the stuff that's critical.
Yeah. Amanda, if I could, just make a comment there.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things, and it's really the title of this is this speed. And, one of the comments I usually make is speed is critical. We're living in an age today that our businesses, the cadence by which we operate is absolutely critical. It defines our ability to compete more effectively in the marketplace. I mean, the days of saying, hey, I got a great innovation and I'm going to bring it to market and, we'll bring it, I mean, not that we were ever trying to not compete on time, but it's just become much more pronounced today than it ever has. And that cadence by which our businesses are moving is just tremendously faster, that clock speed. And the challenge that we get, and I work with a lot, so do you, a lot of different procurement organizations. And the biggest complaint, bar none, it's not you don't save me enough money, procurement or just strategic sourcing, et cetera. It's you're too slow. You're not allowing me to meet the demands that are out there in the marketplace because of the speed. And the onboarding process is one of those challenges. We sit there and we bring on a new supplier. And again, we got all different types of suppliers, but some of those suppliers are innovative. They're there, and the services or goods that they're going to provide to us is critical for us getting in the market to compete more effectively, et cetera. And when we're told it's going to take 3 months to go do that, with all of these things that we've been layering into this onboarding process, is not acceptable. I've had organizations, and procurement is challenged because it takes the rep for a lot of this, even though some of the efforts that are associated with it, whether it be risk assessments, et cetera, are occurring somewhere else. But that cycle time, that elapsed time from when we identify the supplier and they're functioning as a partner of ours in our business and embedded, has to be reduced.
I got to talk about this. Sorry, Amanda.
I was going to give an example, but you go for it, and then I'll circle back. It's
just my passion, right? I actually left the enterprise procurement space because I saw this happening, Chris. I mean, we used in the 90s, I'd onboard a supplier in a couple of 24 hours, 48 hours with a fax machine, and we've implemented so much technology over the past few decades. And you got to ask yourself, is it going faster? Is it going slower? And it's not apples to apples. Like let's be fair, right? It's the demands on the procurement team have gone up tremendously since the 90s. I mean, we rarely did even a financial viability assessment, and this was with a very, very sophisticated procurement team. And I think smartly so. I mean, post-COVID, I think everyone thinks they need to do financial viability assessment on every supplier in the enterprise, which kind of blows my mind. But there's so much that we need to do. Yet we're typically trying to do it the same way we did it, 10 or 20 years ago, with email and really in very analog ways. And I just think that it's a real challenge that we've got to figure out how to get ourselves around. And I think we've, not everybody. I see a big shift in procurement where leaders are starting to look out the window more than look in the mirror. I think maybe like how good are we versus how are we helping the business? Like, we exist to help the business be successful.
Right.
And so, you know, when you're looking in the mirror, you just don't realize that acceleration of the business speed and the demand and the requirement that you're talking about. You look at the business and start seeing, hey, they need me to do this. They need me to move faster. Then you have to start making these compromises. And ultimately, you know, I have to confess, the first few years of this complexity coming onto my plate as a procurement leader, I was sort of like, this is the hot potato. Like, I'm the purchasing guy. The delay is coming from legal. The delay is coming from the CISO. It's not me. It's not my team. It's those guys. And after a while, it's like, that just doesn't cut it anymore. The business looks at, they look at procurement as the owner of this process, even though we're juggling and managing across so many functions. And so it's important for us as procurement leaders to step up to that challenge and that opportunity. Okay, I am no longer the CPO or the head of procurement. I'm the head of procurement and vendor risk management. Like, I'm the one that's going to own this thing start to stop and make sure that these things are balanced. And that becomes, I think, increasingly more important, because I see risk professionals often think they have an unlimited budget for risk. Like, I can't let anything go wrong or I might lose my job. And the procurement professional that kind of stands between them and the business realizes that on the other side, the business has this other thing, like we don't have an unlimited budget. As you said, Chris, the clock speed is going faster. We have to deliver. We have to get time, you know, we have to get to market. And it's the procurement professional between the two of those that has to come up with the right answer. Like, how do we support the business success? And how do we sort of balance the right level of risk and security that has to be delivered in that, right? Because it's not easy. It really isn't.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the balance, because these other things are probably going to get even more. We were just talking about, you know, some of the privacy concerns when it comes to AI and generative AI and just the proliferation of data information. How do we keep all of that? So it's not going to get easier on a go-forward basis. You know, it's going to probably get more difficult, but we have to balance the business needs and the other. And the business is not going to take an excuse that, well, we got to go do all these other things. It has to go fast to be able to compete. And at the end of the day, we have to do that. So the question is, how do we do all these other things, but do it in a way that's not only effective, but it is, you know, efficient and fast, because we have to do that. You know, I'm a firm believer that the future isn't about just having, you know, a unique idea. I do believe that a lot of the future is having it. It's the time that you get it to market. It's always been a challenge, but I think it's even more critical on a go-forward basis.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting as, like, I'm thinking about examples of all new regulations that are coming out, particularly related to supplier onboarding. I mean, you layer in all of these new regulations across the globe and building that into the process. I think that obviously we're talking about technology and how technology can accelerate here, but I think it's not only acceleration, but it's visibility. Like, you hear all the time when you hear the comments around how slow procurement is, you also hear it's like this void. Like,
the black box is what I call it.
Yes, yeah. There's a void there. And so I think we have to be thinking about speed, but we also have to be thinking about visibility, right? Like, I'll give you the example I was going to give you. We're working on onboarding with a new client of ours, and they sent us, Conrad, you'll love this. They sent us a Word document questionnaire that was like 7 pages long. Okay. That we're now needing to complete. And it is an interesting process. I'm thinking to myself, as someone that loves procure tech, I'm like, first of all, why is this not in a procurement technology? Right. And then as I'm filling out the questionnaire, they can see the status of what I'm doing and how I'm going through it and having that visibility back and forth. But instead it was a Word attachment sent in an email. Right. And I've been sitting, honestly, we've had it now for almost a week and a half, right? Trying to figure out how are we going to, who's best on the team to fill it out, et cetera, et cetera. And meanwhile, we're not getting onboarded. Right.
Yeah.
Like that. And go ahead.
Yeah. Well, you get it also is that, you know, a lot of these, you know, you're talking about a questionnaire, and we see it in the studies that we do on supplier onboarding. it's like, you know, almost 50% of the organizations are still using these questionnaires, these documents that they're passing, either an Excel sheet or a Word document, et cetera, going between the organizations. You know, in today's day, it doesn't make any sense. But, you know, the challenge is that, you know, what are we doing to actually to speed that up? And, you know, one of the things that I think that, you know, when you look at this, you know, a lot of that is, I lost my train of thought when I was just telling you what I was trying to go talk about there. There was something that you mentioned, and then I made another comment. But the you know, today, I mean, the onboarding is just, you know, way too. And you know, one of the things that we see, you know, if you think about the extent of this, you know, it's like 10 to 18% of our entire supply base, and depending on the size of the company, is being onboarded, is new suppliers coming on an annual basis. That's massive if you think about that, and that velocity by which we can go do that. I now remember my point.
Okay.
It was about being fit for purpose. You know, one of the things that we've seen is, you know, sort of, again, I've been using the term bifurcation, but you see these organizations that were doing very little in terms of risk assessments and all the, you know, necessities as you onboard a new supplier. And then we had the other population that was basically, it was like one size fits all. I don't care who you are. You're a mom and pop shop. You're going to fill out this, you know, 300-page document of all your risks, et cetera. And it was, half of it wasn't applicable. And it was like, you know, we had to go and start to look at it and say, we got to unwind a lot of this stuff because it's not necessary in a lot of these situations.
You know, I talk to a lot of people, Amanda, that think that maybe AI will solve all of that for us. Like there's a hope and a prayer that we can kind of jump from what you guys are just describing as these very manual processes to, oh, AI will just fix this. I have a little bit of a different opinion about that because we see, I mean, we've lived for decades with organizations that have been sort of scraping from the world of knowledge and putting it into a database. And at the end of the day, it's helpful, but it's not reliable. You can't necessarily trust that something that got scraped is what's going to work for you.
Yeah.
You know, there are so many ways that we can move forward. It's just a commitment to, you know, embrace the new technologies and look for other alternatives. Both of you are talking about models that are essentially a 1990s fax machine equivalent today. And we can do better than that. It's just pushing ourselves, you know, in new ways to make that advance.
Okay. Yeah, I absolutely agree. So we have about 15 minutes left for everyone that has joined us today. If you have questions for Chris and Conrad, or myself, if you want to throw me in there, please feel free to either use the Q&A function or the chat feature. I will be bringing those into the conversation. Real quick, we did get our first question. So you guys want to tackle this one. Why do you think procurement teams are still using Word documents for supplier onboarding? What holds our teams back from modernization of this process?
What do you see, Chris?
Yeah, I can go first. You know, it's sometimes it's just, in many ways, it's just budget. You know, you know, I think a lot of us recognize that there are tools. I don't think we're in a period of time now that, you know, procurement organizations are sitting there and saying, oh yeah, there's all these different things that are going on and, you know, I don't know how to solve them. You know, I think there's much more awareness that there are technologies out there that can solve many of these different types of areas. You know, the challenge is, as a supply management organization today, the number of priorities that you have as an organization are significantly higher than they were 5-10 years ago. We have a lot of things, you know, so one of the examples I give is that, you know, today, you know, we're focusing on cost. We've been focused on cost for a long time. But guess what? We also have sustainability on there. If we went back, you know, prior to 2021 and, you know, for the majority of organizations, that wasn't a concern. Cost didn't go away. It's that you're going to focus on cost. You're also now going to focus on sustainability. You're going to focus on diversity. You're going to go focus on third-party risk management. You're going to do all of these different types of things and, you know, give me good cost. And today, cost is more elevated. So I think that's part of the challenges is just the breadth of areas that we have to focus on as an organization.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I would also say, I think, Amanda, Word is an easy answer. Like we're all comfortable. It's almost like I can go to this chat GPT to get an opinion. So it's kind of the ultimate notepad of creating a form and a process that I can send out. You know, we definitely need to get, as an industry, better at figuring out how to bring, and we do this at Graphite, but figuring out how to bring these forms and these processes from, you know, something as simple as Word to an automated database that kind of is as a network and shareable. You know, it's something we need to do a better job at from a technology solution provider perspective. So people can see the stepping stones to get from what's super easy for them to understand to a solution that's actually going to lead to long-term better efficiencies and better data.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think asking ourselves as procurement leaders, is this going to accelerate what we're doing? And is it going to provide the visibility that we need, right? Especially as the world gets more complicated, Word is not going to be able to do that for us. Excel spreadsheets are not going to be able to do that for us because it's getting more and more complicated. Where we could be building in much more time into the process than the business is going to allow for, right? And I think we're already there. We're already hearing that feedback. I mean, we've been hearing that feedback for years now. So really taking a step back and thinking about it differently and being able to describe that story. I think there's a lot that could be desired around procurement, really understanding how to sell that into the business and not making it about procurement, but making it about the business, right? And being able to sell that story.
Yeah, I've just got to mention one other thing, Amanda. When I started my career, I, a little bit by strategy and a little bit by accident, came up with this personal career strategy that said, I need to figure out how to do my job in about 30 hours a week so that I have 10 hours a week to make my job better. And you know, there's no way that you can do your job in 30 hours a week, particularly if you try and do the perfection or like everything for everybody kind of answer. So like budgeting your prioritization in a way that you get your core job done and you still allocate enough time to move the needle forward, like you're saying. Both of you are saying it's a question of time and resources, but also continuous improvement. And you know, that has been maybe one of the most important things in my career, is to allow time in my budget to actually make it better and not just do the job.
No, I love that.
Yeah, that's critical. But you know, Amanda, one of the things I was going to also say about, you know, the question on, you know, why are we still using Excel and Word and all those types of things? And that, you know, I do believe that, you know, there's a tipping point we get to at some point. You know, you hear about that sort of the bell-shaped curve, and you know, we're not fully through that. But when that momentum gets going, I think you're going to see a massive shift going in that direction. I don't, you know, it's typically it's you know, more seismic at some point, and then you know, it's just you can't compete without it. Challenge with the prioritization is there's a lot of different areas we want to enable, and the question is how do I make those decisions across all those areas? And if one of your biggest complaints from the business is speed, well, then this would be an area that I think you need to go focus on.
Okay. Yep, absolutely. So keep the questions coming in. We just got another question. This is for you, Chris. What area of procurement do you think teams should apply Gen AI first?
It's a great question, and I alluded to that in my conversation, you know, earlier. I think there's a couple of different ways to look at it. You know, when you think about generative AI, and you know, in one way, you could say that you know, organizations are utilizing productivity tools, and so if you haven't started down that path of using a Chat GPT or a Microsoft Copilot, you know, in that version of it, then I think that's a way to start to apply it in the environment you're using it. It's not specific to procurement, but it is freeing up time. You know, how do you free up that capacity? You know, again, one of the other big complaints of procurement, I don't have time. Oh, you want me to put a strategy together? Why are you so reactive when you go out and you focus on these different categories? I don't have time. So we got to free up that time. So there's a productivity way of doing that. I think as you look at other types of areas, I mentioned earlier, the whole area around contract lifecycle management. You know, I usually tell organizations, you know, when you look at, sort of generative AI, it focuses on unstructured data. And so when you look at where do we have that, where are we pulling together a lot of data, a lot of information from multiple different sources, et cetera, again, the contracts area, an area that a lot of other organizations in the population that we went out to in our study highlighted that they saw this as a great opportunity. And we're seeing it being used today. So if you want to have something that we already know is proven and tested, that would be another area that I would utilize and apply it there as well. I think Conrad said it earlier, the use cases will continue to proliferate. We're out there today, but I always tell organizations, look for those areas where you have a lot of information. If you got to put a strategy together, think about all of the information that we pull together to develop a category strategy coming from multiple different sources, et cetera, to put a SWOT analysis together. All these different types of things require a lot of data coming from different sources. Well, these are perfect examples. Once it's structured, then we're going to talk about other types of intelligent automation tools. But generative AI is focusing on that unstructured, all of that data that's out there that you're able to pull together. Look for those opportunities.
Okay, I love that, Chris. One additional question that came in to clarify, if you had to re-answer that question, not related to Gen AI, but AI in general, would there be other areas that you would recommend too?
Well, we talked about that one as well, and that was just spend analytics. Again, you look at sort of left side and right side of the brain, right side being generative AI, it's not exact. It's taking a lot of information and based on, comes up with an answer. Predictive, which is the left side of the brain, you look at, spend analytics. Conrad said, hey, most of that, we've been applying things like machine learning to spend analytics for a long time. How do we not only analyze the data of the here and now, but can we do predictive analysis to say, what do we believe our spending will be in the future? Can we predict what we think pricing trends will be, et cetera? You're seeing that today. That's more of the predictive analytical types of AI, but there's a lot of opportunities to start joining those together as well, looking forward.
Perfect. Okay, Conrad, we had another question come in, and this one's for you. When you are a procurement practitioner, how did you decide what processes to try to automate first? And did you rely on your team to surface that, or did you see inefficiencies that you wanted to improve?
Well, second part of that question first. Like I always tried to hire the very best people, what's the saying? A players hire A players. And so I've never believed that I'm smarter than everybody on my team. So I absolutely rely on the team to bring ideas and work together to bring that kind of, efficiency and automation. Ultimately, I think there's two things to consider. One is it all comes back to an ROI of some form or fashion, but how can this bring efficiencies? But how can it also bring efficiencies and credibility as it relates to the end user? I think it's so important to kind of, again, not be looking in the mirror like, oh my gosh, look at, what did we do in the early days? We created procurement as a self-service. Like, hey, guess what? We automated procurement. We can do it with 3 people now. And, 10,000 people in the organization have to do stuff they never did before. Like, right. Was that a good idea or not? I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure we really evaluated the ROI of moving 3 people out of procurement and having engineers spend, 30 minutes a week on procurement. So I think it's really important as we're looking at what we're automating to say, what is the impact on the end users? And ultimately there is a time and efficiency play there, but there's a credibility thing that I think is very important, because we have to, if we're going to really enable the success, they have to trust us and they have to see that we're doing the things that are helping them. What's most important to them? What are they struggling with? And will it help them? So I kind of think we have to subvert our priorities to what matters most to them, and in that balance of, what are we going to implement? I guess that's my answer.
Okay.
Amanda, can I make one comment? Just on that, we've been talking a lot about, the generative AI and the application and the supplier onboarding process and all those different types of things. But, a lot of focus on use cases, and it's been certainly a big area of focus. And there was the question, from the audience, previously in terms of, where are some of the best areas to apply not only AI, but generative AI. But the other thing you have to think about as you ready your organization looking forward, and this is what I'll call in a broader context of the operating model itself. Conrad, talked about skills and talent and people and those decisions that have to be made. This is going to fundamentally change the organization as we look out over the next 5, even 7 years. And so the question is, what does the organizational structure fundamentally look like? And how will that change? How will the data needs of the organization change? What will be the skills that are necessary, not only what we have today, but when we free up, when we have, other tools that are creating the strategies for us at some point later on, then what are we doing? And I like to say is that we're really moving into an environment where we have to start really thinking about what do we really deliver? And that is intelligence, becoming much more of an intelligence center for the organization through our access and insights from the supply markets.
Ooh, I love that. I love that. And we're coming up on the end of this webinar. I really appreciate everyone that was on today. Just a couple of closing thoughts that I am hearing from both of you is now is the time to really reimagine what we're doing in procurement. We have technology that's coming online. It is going to change how we organize ourselves, the value we can provide, the insights and intelligence that we can provide to the organization, the agility, the speed, while still managing risk, will be able to be really looked at critically to understand how do we want to move forward in the future. So I always like to tell people, now is the time to be in procurement. It is so freaking exciting to be in procurement, to be supporting procurement. We can look at this as a huge opportunity to really take a step change into the future. So I'm super grateful for both of your insights today, Conrad and Chris. So thank you so much for participating and having this conversation today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.